So now we have to start off with your angel curves. Okay. So angel curves basically tells the relationship between income and output. Okay. So how the income will affect output is shown by angel curves. It is nothing but a graphical representation of the relationship between income and output. Okay. Now, in the case of, say, normal goods, we know that there is a positive relationship between income and output. Okay. But in case of normal goods also, we have two kinds of goods, that is necessities and luxuries. Right? So for necessities, in elasticity of income, we've done that the elasticity of income lies between 0 and 1. And in case of luxuries, elasticity of income is greater than 1. Now, because necessities is like less elastic, so any change in income will not bring about a much change in your quantity demanded. And as a result, your angel curve is steeper in case of your necessities. Okay, so you can just correct this diagram here. It's you supposed to be steeper. Okay, so for example, if we take Y1 as income 1 and Q1 as income 2. So an increase in income to Y2 will bring about an increase in income to Q2. But if you notice that the change in Y2 is greater than the change in Q2. Okay, so this is a case of necessities, and necessities will have a steeper angel curve. On the other hand, your luxuries. In case of luxuries, it will be a flatter angel curve. That means a small increase in income will bring about a much larger increase in output. Okay. However, for inferior goods, we know that there is a negative relationship that is formulated between income and output. So that is why the angel curve is downward sloping. And whereas for a neutral good, which means that it is not affected with the level of income, for that your angel curve is a straight vertical line. And this can be an example like medicines. So if your income increases, you don't start consuming more tablets. No, that is not the case. Right? So you will consume the same number of tablets irrespective of the income level which you have. Okay? So this is your angel curves. And then we have an income consumption curve. Now, please remember that there's a difference, right? So usually students, confuse between angel curves and income consumption curve. So angel curve is explicitly showing the relationship between income and output. On the other hand, your income consumption curve shows, right? Shows the changes in equilibrium, changes in consumers' equilibrium due to change in income. So for this, your income consumption curve would be, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So this is your budget line. And this is your indifference curve. 1. Okay. So this is your equilibrium here. Then your income increases. So there would be an outward shift in your budget line. Okay. And as a result, your consumer equilibrium is, say, like here. Okay. So when we trace these points of consumer equilibrium, we'll get your income consumption curve, where on x-axis we have good x and on y-axis we have good y. Okay, now we have to understand the shape of the indifference income consumption curve. Now this can be asked in the sense, let's just take this, let's just do this our way, right? So this is the good x and good y. This is your income initially. Okay. Now income increases. If income increases, this is good x which you are consuming. This is y1 is the good y. Now when income increases, say you are reaching this indifference curve 2. Okay. So now the commodity X2 will be consumed, X2 level of good X will be consumed, and Y2 level of good Y will be consumed. So if you see, an increase in income is leading to an increase in both good X and increase in good Y. So we can say here that both good X and Y are normal goods. Agreed? Right? Okay, now let's just see another case now. This is the x-axis, good x, y, the y-axis. We have this much level of, say, indifference curve 1, where we are consuming x1 level of good x and y1 level of good y. Okay, now let's just see that income increases. Okay, and your indifference curve, the new equilibrium comes at this IC2. Okay, so at this, the good X that is consumed is X2, which has reduced. Good Y that is consumed is Y2, which has increased. Okay, so this means that an increase in income has resulted into a fall in X but a rise in Y. So this means that X is an inferior good and Y is a normal good. And your income consumption curve would look like this. It would be a backward sloping curve. Similarly, if your income consumption curve would have been like this, bending towards x-axis, then it would imply that your x is a normal good, but y is an inferior good. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, this is the most dreaded thing. Like, are you even confused about the substitution effect, the Higgs and the Slutsky effect? Because no matter how many students I've got, like how many batches I've conducted, everyone is confused with this thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, let's just start. Now you just stop looking at the book, right? And we'll just do this, okay? So substitution effect. Right. Okay, now first thing is that in case of substitution effect, we understood that we are talking about your relative prices. Okay, relative prices in the sense px upon py. So a rise in the relative price would mean that your good has become more expensive. That would lead to a fall in quantity demanded. Okay, And a fall in relative price would mean that your good has become cheaper, which will lead to a rise in quantity demanded. Okay, so we will always say that substitution effect will always be negative, in the sense that it will always show an inverse relationship between price and relative prices and quantity demanded. Okay, now in case of Hicks substitution effect, so Hicks substitution effect basically states that if there is any change in prices which causes a change in income, we should help the consumer reach the original level of utility or satisfaction. That the consumer should be able to reach the original utility or satisfaction where he was. Okay, so the heat substitution effect. Let's just see the step by step here. Okay. Now, this is your budget line. Okay. And this is your first indifference curve, where the consumer is. Okay. Originally is. So, I will mark it as 0.1 here. Okay. Now, suppose the price of good X falls. Now, what will happen? The budget line would move outwards because the price of good has fallen, right? So now the consumer can actually buy more of good X. Agreed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so as a result, he will reach a higher indifference curve, say IC2. But because of this increase, now we have to bring the consumer back to the original utility. So the income of the real income of the individual would be taxed in such a way that the real income will fall in such a way that the new real income would become tangent to your original indifference curve, right? So the consumer has reached back to his original IC1. He has reached to a point where he can achieve the same level of satisfaction which he already was, right? So this is 0.3. Okay, and this is say 0.2. Okay, now 0.2, usually it is above this thing, usually, right? But I'll just explain this to you. Okay, so now if you see, the movement from 1 to 2 is due to the price change, right? The relative price change. The relative prices have changed, isn't it? Price of X became cheaper and it changed.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? So, due to this relative price change, this will be the movement from 1 to 2 will be your price effect. Okay? But the movement from 2 to 3, will be it is because of change in income, because income decreased after that, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So the movement, the 2 to 3 movement would be income effect. Okay? And this 1 to 3, the change 1 to 3, we are on the same indifference curve, but we are just substituting one commodity for another, right? The movement from 1 to 3. We are on the same indifference curve, but we are just substituting one commodity for another. So this 1, 3 would be your substitution effect. Okay? Now you can also see that in books, usually the diagram goes like they will mark the indifference curve here. IC3, so that this is the point. Instead of 2, this is the 2. Just to prove that price effect is equal to substitution effect plus income effect. Okay. But you need to understand the idea behind it. So 1 to 2 is the price effect here. Why? Because of the change in prices of good X. 2 to 3 is the income effect simply because of change in income. And 1 to 3 is that we are on the same indifference curve and we are just substituting one commodity for another. So 1 to 3 is your substitution effect. Okay?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Let's just see. Now, this is the Hicks scenario. Now, in Slutsky, he says that you tax the person in case of a fall in price of a commodity. You tax the person in such a way that at least he is able to consume the original bundle. So what happens in this case is, in the case of Slutsky, it goes like this was my original budget line and this is my IC1. Okay. Now, the price falls for X. So budget line moves outwards and I'm at IC2. So I've moved from point X1 to point X2, right? Now this is due to price change. So it will be called my price effect. Okay. Now, because now we are able to consume more, we are able to afford more, right? So the income should be taxed according to the Slutsky effect in such a way that the consumer is able to afford the original bundle, that is X1. So what happens in this case is that your budget line would cross or would intersect this point. Intersect this point and your indifference curve will be above IC1. So we'll have another indifference curve, IC3, right, in which the new bundle is your X3 level. Okay, so the change from X2 to X1, X2 to X3 will be your income effect because it is due to change in income. And X1, X3 would be your substitution effect because while you could afford the original bundle, but you are now on the higher indifference curve and consuming X3 level of commodity. Okay. So in case of Slutsky, the consumer is overcompensated. Okay. Anything, any query, any doubt?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay. So, there's a lot of mathematical, formulation behind this, but I would recommend you to please remember this table. Okay. So there
Okay.
has been a couple of times, like 1 or 2 times only, that a question on this has been asked. So please just memorize this. This is an important table. Okay. Now, what about the price effect? Now, like in case of income effect, it was graphically shown by ICC. So price effect is shown by your PCC, price consumption curve, and it is nothing but the changes in consumer equilibrium due to change in price. And when I say price, it will always be relative prices. Okay. So, for example, let's just say this is the original budget line and IC1. Now, if price of X falls, the budget line moves outwards, right? And this is the new equilibrium point. Okay. Similarly, price falls further, and this becomes your third point of equilibrium. So when you join these points of equilibrium, you will get PCC. Okay. Similarly, there is a downward sloping PCC as well, which shows that price elasticity is greater than 1 in this case, right? How? In the sense that this is your original IC equilibrium point. Now, when price elasticity is high, that will show you that your quantity demanded is much more than your change in price. Price elasticity greater than 1 only reflects that change in quantity is much more than your change in price. Okay. So in this case, the price of X has fallen. Okay. In that case, your consumption, your IC would be here somewhere. We have to show a large change in your quantity demanded. So when we find the locus of these points, when we join the locus points, then in that case, your PCC would become downward sloping. So PCC is upward sloping when price elasticity is less than 1, right? And PCC is downward sloping when price elasticity is greater than 1. Okay. Then, what about the horizontal PCC? This will be when there is no change in quantity demanded, proportionate change in quantity demanded due to change in price. That means your change in price is equal to the change in quantity, right? So this will happen when your PCC curve will be horizontal sloping. Let's just see this. This is your IC, budget line and IC, and this is your equilibrium point. Now, price of X changes, price of X falls, and there is an equivalent amount of change in quantity. Okay. So as a result, there will be a horizontal sloping PCC curve. Okay. Now, anything till now?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So why we say that when price elasticity is less than 1 and your PCC curve is, upward sloping, then the goods are complementary in nature. Because when price of X was falling, right? When price of X was falling, so logically you should have just increased the consumption of your X. But you are increasing the consumption of both X and Y instead due to change in price of X, right? So a fall in price of X is leading to a rise in quantity of X and also a rise in quantity of Y. Okay, so this implies that your goods are complementary in nature because both the goods are consumed together. But in case of price elasticity greater than 1 and a downward sloping PC means a rise in price of X is leading, sorry, a fall in price of X is leading to a fall in good Y as well, fall in the consumption of good Y, right? So this means that the two goods are complementary in nature, sorry, substitutes in nature. And lastly, when price of X falls, right, and your PCC curve is horizontal. So this means that a change or fall in price of X is not affecting the consumption of good Y. The consumption of good Y remains the same. So this means that the goods are unrelated. Okay. And in case of given goods, your PCC would shape or would be a backward sloping curve in the sense that this is your original budget line, your IC curve, right? A fall in price of X, in case of given goods, a fall in price would lead to a fall in quantity demanded. There's a positive relationship. So if the price of X has fallen, so it will lead to a fall in quantity of X, right? So if graphically we have to show it, we'll show it like this. So in this case, the PCC curve would be backward sloping. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Now, another thing is like here, the price effect. People usually ask that why is the income effect positive or negative in this case, right? So please take a note of this equation. Once you're clear with this equation, you will be clear with this table as well, right? Now, dx by dpx. This is your price effect, right? Change in quantity of X due to change in price of X. So that is your price effect. Okay. Now, dxc upon dpx is your substitution effect, right? So how is your commodity being affected due to change in price of the good, like, so how will your demand for related good be affected due to change in price of X? That is your substitution effect. And then this last term, that is X into dx by dm will be, so if we just take this dx by dm, that will be your money income effect. So income effect basically. So how is your income, affecting the quantity demanded of X, right? So this way. Now, one thing we know is that substitution effect is always negative, right? So this term will always be negative. Okay. So in case of your normal goods may your dx by dm would be a positive figure because they show a positive relationship between income and quantity demanded. So minus and minus, right? So minus plus will be minus. So minus and minus, the total figure would be in negative, right? So in case of your normal goods, the price effect would be negative, implying that a rise in price will lead to A rise in price will lead to a fall in quantity demanded and vice versa. So price and quantity would go in opposite directions. So that's what your normal goods says. Okay, but in case of inferior goods, we know that, okay, substitution effect is negative, that is for sure. We know that income effect is also negative in case of inferior goods. So minus minus would become positive. So the second term would become positive. But we also know this thing that for inferior goods, there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay. So this whole term, will become negative only if your substitution effect is greater than the income effect. If the negative value is greater than the positive value, only then we will get a negative outcome, right? So in case of inferior goods, why the price effect turns out to be negative is simply because of the stronger substitution effect. And in case of Giffen goods, the effect, this income minus minus plus, this positive figure is much stronger than the substitution effect. So in case of Giffen goods, the income effect is stronger than the substitution effect. Okay, so the plus figure is larger and the minus figure is smaller. So the outcome would be a positive figure. And as a result, your Giffen goods shows a positive relationship between price and quantity demanded, and hence a positive price effect. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am, so this equation, do we have to just memorize it, or means
So
how
there
does we arrive to this expression? We have to also look into that.
No, because it's an MCQ types, no, so you won't be asked the derivation and all. So that is why it's best if you just know the equation. They won't usually even ask the equation, but sometimes they ask that why is the price effect coming out to be, greater, like positive. So there is like option one, substitution effect is greater than income effect for Giffen goods. Option two, income effect is greater than substitution effect, and so on. So you should know this table. But sometimes like students do, why I've given this equation is that students got confused with this table, right? That why is it so, right? The positive figure is greater than the negative figure and they were all messed up with this one. That's why the equation was necessary to give, because of this minus minus becomes positive, and that's how they understood, right? So you can just like just know this equation and then you can understand this table. So once you've understood this table, it will be all fine for you, right?
Okay.
Okay. Now, what are the benefits of your, just a second. Hmm. Hmm. Okay. So what are the benefits of your ordinal theory of demand? First is that it will divide the price effect into substitution effect and income effect. That's one benefit. And also it tells you about the positive relationship between your quantity demanded and price. Okay, but then we also have a compensated demand curve, which will only consider your substitution effect and will keep the income level constant, the real income as constant, right? So we'll do that later. We'll do this compensated demand curve later, but just for the introduction, this is mostly used in case of your consumer surplus, simply because it becomes like it keeps the real income as constant, because consumer surplus is what a person is willing to pay minus what he actually pays. So if the real income is variable, so that willingness to pay and what actually pays would keep on changing. So just for simplicity's sake, we keep real income as constant. Okay. Now, coming on to the revealed preference theory. Again, the name is very important, right? Paul Samuelson in 1938. Sometimes, just keep an account of these years as well, because they do ask chronological ordering, right? And as the name suggests, sorry, where is this? Okay. As the name suggests, this theory basically talks about the consumer revealing his preference. So they say this that Samuelson says that if a consumer prefers a commodity, he will always prefer that commodity. So, for example, if a person who is used to an iOS, system, he will always consume Apple. Otherwise, a person who is used to the Android version will always use Android. Okay, so they won't move. So that's what Samuelson says, that if a person prefers a thing, he will always prefer that, and his choices won't change unless and until the device or the good becomes unaffordable. Okay, so that is why we say that this theory is based on strong ordering, because a consumer is very particular about what he has to choose. Okay, so he will not be indifferent, because in indifference curves, we said that it is based on weak ordering, because a person is indifferent, can be indifferent between two bundles, right? But in case of revealed preferences, we know that your consumer will always make a choice, will always prefer, and his choice will determine his ranking of the goods or the bundles, right? So, what are the assumptions of this theory? First is the consistency, that if a consumer chooses A over C or B, right? So he will always choose A. The number of times he's posed a question about what you want, A or B, he will always choose A, right? Then transitivity. So if A is preferred to B and B is preferred to C, so A is always preferred to C. That's the transitivity case. Then choice is always made. There's a choice that is always made in this case. And then we do not take savings into account. So the consumer will spend his entire income. Okay. Then monotonicity, more is preferred to less. So if the consumer is choosing A over B, so if they are like the same commodities, the same bundles, so if he is choosing A over B, then it is highly probable that A has more number of units as compared to B. So more is preferred to less. And consumer behaves rationally. He will definitely consume the bundle which has more commodities. Okay. Now, then is your revealed preference axiom, means the way the consumer is spending his budget will determine his choices. So there are people who would like to say invest more in education than on any other luxurious item. Okay. There are people who may just, like for them, education might be secondary and they can just invest in some other luxurious item, right? So a revealed preference axiom is that a budget, the spending of that budget will clearly state the choices of the consumer. Okay. Now, in this case, your choices are consistent, the tastes are independent of his choice and they do not change. So it is not like today you like, okay, you like something spicy, but after 10 years, you will develop a sweet tooth. No. So the choices would remain same. It won't change over time. Okay. And consumer is rational, means he will prefer more goods. So if we see the diagram here, this is the revealed preference curve, his preference curve basically. Any point above this line would be that he cannot afford it, right? He cannot afford it. This is the line of budget. We know we have made this assumption that the consumer will fully spend his income. So any point above this line means that the consumer cannot afford that bundle. And any point below this line will be an inferior bundle simply because the consumer is in no way to save. He will just consume his entire income. Okay. Now, then what about your direct revealed preference? So in this case, if you see this diagram, you have 2 points, A and B, right? So in this case, the consumer will always choose A, right? Will always choose A because he's making his preference really clear, because if you are at point A, if you are at this green line, you are stating that despite being able to afford B, you can afford B, but still you're not willing to do that. So instead, you are choosing A, you are giving up on B, a B bundle, and which you can afford, which you could buy. But choosing A means you have clearly stated your choice of preferring A over B. Okay. And then your indirect revealed preference will tell you about the transitivity aspect. Again, this is A preferred to B and B preferred to C. Okay, but there are three axioms related to your revealed preference, right? There are three possibilities or three chances that can happen. First is your weak axiom, then your strong axiom, and your generalized axiom. So what is weak axiom is that you are posed with a bundle of wood. So you can shift this here, this diagram. So you're posed with a bundle of wood where like this, these are the two budget lines. This one is here A and one is B, right? So in this case, if you look at point A, right, you can see that the B is not affordable. Bundle B is not affordable. And same is true for bundle B, that if you choose bundle B, then A is not affordable, right? And your weak axiom of revealed preference tells you this only, that if a choice is made between these two, if a choice is made between these two, then the preference, whatever preference he is doing, whatever choice he's making, the consumer is making, he will always go by that, right? So this is what your weak axiom is, that because of this unaffordability issue that comes in between. So A will be preferred when B is not affordable, and B will be preferred when A is not affordable, right? So in this case, the term weak suggests that because of this unaffordability issue, we cannot actually, reveal the preference of the consumer. We cannot just do that. Okay, so it is difficult. It is difficult to identify which choice the consumer will make all the time. Okay. Then second comes the strong axiom of revealed preference. Now this states that if there are multiple goods, then we will rule out the inconsistent choices. So here we are just taking two bundles, but in real life, we do not have just two bundles. We have multiple options there, right? So the strong axiom, for example, let's just say, okay, A person, if there are X number of vehicles, say there are two-wheelers, there are three-wheelers, there are cycles, there are, say, public transport, four-wheelers are there, and so on. So a lay person, like if I have to go to a college, right, then I won't be buying a three-wheeler, right? So I'll obviously strike that out, right? So I will have an option of a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler, right? Similarly, if a poor person wants to, make a living out of this transport thing, so he will be buying a three-wheeler or a four-wheeler, right? Okay, now Motor Go is also there, but when it was not there, so if a person wanted to do that, so he could just buy a three-wheeler or a four-wheeler, right? So the choice, the inconsistent or the irrelevant choice is always struck out. So the strong axiom of revealed preference says that whatever is not needed is already struck out, right? And that will never be chosen. I can never see myself, buying a three-wheeler, buying an auto. I can never see myself. So that choice, I will not even look at it. So that choice is always struck out. Okay, so this is what your strong axiom of revealed preference states. Then your generalized axiom of revealed preference. So it is like this states, the generalized axiom states that in reality, you can consume different bundles of goods, and those different bundles can give you the same level of utility. So, for example, let's just say if I have a four-wheeler, okay, to reach a place, it takes me 1 hour. Okay, in a very highly populated area, supposedly in a metropolitan city, right? I have a four-wheeler and reaching a place will take me around 1 hour, right? But if I have a two-wheeler, then it might take me 15 minutes. So this both the things can actually give me satisfaction. Where four-wheeler is giving me the comfort, but is taking a lot of time. A two-wheeler might be a little risky, but it is just taking less time. So these both the consumption of these goods can give me an equal level of satisfaction. Sometimes I may travel in a four-wheeler, or I may travel on a two-wheeler, right? So generally in households in India, we do have, like, people do own a two-wheeler as well, right? It's not like they always have a car. No, they do own, like, especially the middle class and the upper middle class, they do have a two-wheeler as well. So, because of this convenience, okay, because both the things at different points of time give you equal level of satisfaction. And that's what your generalized axiom of revealed preference states. Okay, so there are criticisms for your revealed preference theory. Firstly, the indifference, because it is based on strong ordering, the indifference aspect is ignored. It is only, included to some extent in the generalized axiom, right? But in detail, it is ignored. Then considers only single act of choice, in the sense that the choice will remain constant. That is not always true. Sometimes we like having top ramen, sometimes we like having Maggie, sometimes we might like having yippee noodles, right? So that is not consistent in reality. Okay. Then we are not talking about the Giffen paradox at all in this case. We have not even considered this, right? And then we are not able to separate, when we are not talking about income and substitution effect here, we are not talking about prices at all. We are just talking about a consumer's budget. That's all, right? And the choices do not always reveal the preference. It is not always true. So a person traveling on a two-wheeler just for the sake of saving time does not reveal the preference that he will always travel on a two-wheeler. No, that's not true, right? And then he does not derive the market demand. Where are we talking about the market demand and revealed preference? And if we start taking, into account the preferences of all the individuals together, I don't know where will this theory go, right? And this theory is not useful in game theory, especially in prisoner's dilemma, right? So that's how. And what is the major difference between your indifference curve and your revealed preferences? That indifference curve analysis uses the real income aspect for satisfaction, right? To achieve the level of satisfaction, where in case of revealed preference, we are only identifying the purchasing power. Okay. Clear till here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'll just take a few more minutes and I would want to finish this theory because then we'll start off with production theory from next week, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so the fundamental theorem of consumption. This was given by, again, Samuelson. So when he was criticized so much, he thought that no, we should include certain aspects as well. So he used the revealed preference theory to state the law of demand. But he didn't use indifference curve analysis, right? He was not using that. But he did state the law of demand in this case. And in this case, he said that a good, if it shows a positive effect, between income and quantity demanded, that is, a rise in income will lead to a rise in quantity demanded. So it will automatically be implied that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So this means that our Samuelson dear was very much rigid on the aspect that all the goods would be will show a negative impact between price and quantity demanded. There is no given good. There is absolutely no given good, and all the goods which are showing a positive impact between income and quantity demanded will have a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So he's talked about inferior goods indirectly, but he has not talked about given goods explicitly. So this is the crux of this theory, in the sense that both these conditions need to be satisfied. Okay. So assumptions are that, again, no change in consumer's taste, and also the choice of a bundle reveals, the consumer's preference, more or less the same assumptions of your revealed preference theory. So the consumer will choose only one combination of goods at a given price. More is preferred to less. Strong ordering means because he's not used indifference curves. He's not used any sort of indifference between goods. Okay. Then there is consistency of choice. And then there is transitivity, right? And positive income elasticity. He's classified the goods, whereas in his revealed preference theory, he did not make any classification between normal and inferior goods. Right? When he was talking about the budget line, he did not make any such clear-cut demarcation between normal goods and inferior goods. But in his fundamental theorem of consumption, one very important change was that he has made a classification between a normal and an inferior good. So a normal good, according to him, would always show a positive relationship between income and quantity demanded, and and a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay. So this one. So when income elasticity of demand is positive, your price elasticity of demand will be negative in any case. Okay. Now, then Hicks, after Samuelson gave his theories, right? So Hicks also brought certain revisions in his indifference curve analysis, right? Because it was also criticized to him. So he was very much influenced by Samuelson's work, and therefore he used econometrics, because we were mostly like that indifference curve is mostly theoretical in nature. But then he took real data, he took real models, and then he used econometrics. And but the only thing which he kept intact was the ordinal nature of your commodity, that you can rank the commodities or the bundles which you have, right? So you are not affected by it, but Hicks says that you will always rank your commodities, right? He will all, and whatever rank he makes, whatever order he decides for the consumption, he will always follow that, right? So there will be, it's more or less the same, but the only difference from your indifference curve analysis was using of your real time data. So he used econometric modeling to prove his point that an individual will always rank his preferences, right? And what he gave up was that while indifference curve was related to only two goods, we had two axes, good X, good Y, that's all. But Hicks said, no, in reality, we consume unlimited number of goods. We can consume many goods at a time, right? So even if you look around you, you're consuming many things at a time. For example, I'm wearing this glasses, I'm using a laptop, I'm using this pen, I have a phone next to me, I have a mouse, I have a pen, I have a cup, and so on. So there, in reality, I'm not just restricting myself to two commodities, but many commodities around me. So he gave up this assumption. Also, he gave up the assumption of continuity. So we don't use or we don't consume the laptops all the time. No, we don't. Yes, we are highly dependent on it, but we don't use it all the time. We don't take it along. Yes, we consume our phones all the time. That's fine. But certain things we won't be consuming all the time. So there is the assumption of continuity is invalidated. Okay. And also he's made a difference. While indifference curve is based on weak ordering, we've always talked about being indifferent between the two commodities or the two bundles of goods, right? We've always stated that. But in case of Hicks logical ordering, he said that no, it is very much possible that you can rank your preferences. There can be a thing, there can be a choice made, there can be a preference, as far as the consumer is concerned. And also, the money is divisible, right? But he stuck to his point that yes, there is a possibility of both preference and indifference, right? For some, a desktop and a laptop, they're indifferent, right? But a laptop and a tablet, yes, they can make a choice. There can be a preference. A desktop and a tablet, yes, there can be a choice. There can be a preference, right? So Hicks said that yes, I was wrong in your indifference curve analysis, that we are only indifferent. There are two goods. We can be consuming different bundles or different combinations of two goods, and they can yield the same level of utility to us. So we can be indifferent. But in reality, we can make a choice. We can make a choice. And that's what his improvement from your indifference curve analysis was. Okay. So, whatever text you get, okay, just read through that over the next 3 days